On the morning of 7th October 1967, the people of Asaba came out wearing white, their traditional akwacha, the cloth that they use for important community moments. Nobody knew exactly what the soldiers wanted, but the town hoped that by showing unity and calm, maybe that would finally stop the killings. Families gathered along Inebisi Road. They were singing One Nigeria, men, women, children, families, all trying to show that, please, they were civilians and not enemies. At that time, Nigeria was in the middle of a civil war. The eastern region had broken away and called itself Biafra. The Nigerian government rejected that idea completely and they sent the army to force the region back. Biafra forces, they pushed into the Midwest, but the Nigerian army fought them back towards the River Niger. And directly opposite Onitsha, on the west bank, was Asaba, a town considered Igbo in culture and language, but politically still part of Nigeria. A town full of civilians, it was suddenly caught between two armies and suddenly they were treated like they belonged to the rebellion. When federal troops entered Asaba in early October, the fear in the town was immediate. The soldiers were angry, they were suspicious after losing some of their men in the Midwest battles. They believed that the local civilians may have supported the Biafran invasion, even though Asaba itself was not a part of Biafra. For 2 days, the soldiers moved through the town. They dragged out young men, they accused random people of hiding rebels, they shot civilians in different parts of Asaba. People hid wherever they could. Some stayed with relatives, some abandoned their homes completely because honestly nobody knew where the soldiers would go next. There was no battle inside Asaba, no Biafran unit inside of the town, but the army behaved as if they were searching for an enemy camp there. People were terrified, bodies were left in the streets, families were too afraid to go and collect their dead. And everybody started asking the same questions. How do we show these soldiers that we're not part of this war? How do we show that we're not the enemy? That fear is what led to the gathering on 7th October. Some survivors say that the community leaders encouraged everybody to come out together. Some say people just followed one another out of fear and confusion. Some say that they hoped a large public show of loyalty would finally calm the soldiers. What we know for sure is that many hundreds of civilians came out that morning wearing white, hoping to show that they were peaceful, hoping to survive. The parade moved down Inebisi Road towards the area that leads to Ogbe Osowa, and then everything changed there. As the crowd reached that point, the soldiers stepped forward and they blocked the road. They ordered women and small children to move to one side. Then they told the men and boys to step forward. Some mothers were not sure, they held on to their sons, and then they were refusing to let go, but the soldiers pulled the boys out. If you looked like a male, even a teenager, you were forced forward. The men and the boys, they were taken towards the open area in Ogbe Osowa. Some stood, some were pushed into tighter groups, some knelt, and then the soldiers brought out machine guns. This part is not in doubt. Multiple survival accounts and historical studies, they describe the machine guns being set up, facing the gathered men and boys. There was no announcement. No questioning, no investigation, nothing, just gunfire. It was quick. It was devastating. Men fell on top of each other. Boys fell beside their fathers. Some tried to run and then they were shot. Some were wounded and collapsed where they stood. Women screamed from the distance, but they were forced back at gunpoint. When the shooting finally stopped, hundreds of men and boys were lying on the ground. The exact number has never been agreed on. A community list recorded 373 names, but even the people who made the list admitted that it was incomplete. Historians estimate between 500 and 800 deaths. Some families believe the number was closer to 1,000. What's certain is that a massive number of unarmed civilians were killed in minutes. The bodies were buried in mass graves. Soldiers forced some people to dig. Most families never got the chance to bury their loved ones properly. Entire family lines were wiped out in that morning. But the suffering did not end there. No. After the massacre, soldiers spread across Asaba. The town was under occupation. Homes were entered, ransacked, property taken. Some people who survived that massacre, right, they returned home to find everything that they owned was gone or destroyed. There were more individual killings. Some men who had hidden during the parade, they were found later and shot. Women also suffered. Some were assaulted or coerced during these months. Many of these stories, they remain quiet because of shame and fear. They only appeared later in survivor testimonies many years later. People were displaced inside their own town. They were sleeping at churches, schools, or with whoever still had a safe space to sleep in. Children grew up hearing gunshots at night, seeing destruction everywhere, seeing bodies in the streets. And months later, in April of 1968, the soldiers carried out another sweep. Survivors called this the second operation. Civilians were rounded up again. Some were killed, some were taken to refugee camps, including St. Patrick's College, which was turned into a holding area, with many of its buildings ruined. By the time the soldiers finally left Asaba, Asaba was still standing physically, but emotionally, it was destroyed. After the war ended in 1970, the people of Asaba, they expected answers. They expected the government to acknowledge what had happened. But there was silence. The official message was, no victor, no vanquished. The country was told to move on quickly, without reopening wounds, Acknowledging a massacre by federal troops, it did not fit that message. There were no trials, no official investigation, no apology, nothing. And because there were almost no journalists present at that event and very few photographs, the massacre slipped out of the national conversation. Survivors were too afraid to speak. Their families were afraid. So the story lived quietly for decades, passed down in living rooms, at funerals, in whispers. It wasn't until many years later that survivors felt ready to talk. They were finally ready. They realized that if they did not speak now, the story would die with them. They described the parade, the separation, the gunfire, the mass graves, the occupation, the fear, the hopelessness. Their testimonies helped scholars to piece together the history. This led to a major research project and eventually a full historical study of the massacre. Asaba also began holding remembrance events, especially on October 7th, to honor those who were killed. Today, the story is known because the survivors fought for it. They refused to let their fathers, their brothers, and their sons disappear from history. The Asaba massacre is not just a war story. It is a story about civilians trapped in someone else's conflict, a story of a town that tried to show peace and paid the highest price, and a reminder of how easily ordinary people can become victims when fear and suspicion take control. So yeah, this is Asaba's story, and it deserves to be remembered by everybody. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like stories like this, please don't forget to follow me on all my social media. I tell stories like this all the time. Thank you.